So thank you again for inviting me to this very meaningful project, the 𝗦𝗫𝘂𝘶 project. And I'm really very happy that the project has gone through the last 5 years of work in inventory, in discussion, knowledge transfer, as well as planning forward for conservation. My sense is that conservation of modern architecture is really very, very much pressing and needed issues. And that really is amplified by the, say, the 𝗕𝗂𝘆𝗵𝗶𝘁𝗵𝗲 complex in Singapore, where the developers would like to demolish the building to a lot of protests. And so it is really time for us to take a very good look at our heritage. And with that, I think we will be able to think about how we are related to those heritage and what we can do to keep them. I think for us, architecture is really a very important tool where symbolism can be expressed and appropriation of this form can be used for advancing certain ideas, and not least including modernism, modernity, as well as identity and nationalism. So today, my talk will center on 3 parts, modernity, modernism, and identity, as well as nationalism. But I think the main goal, and I think for the 𝗦𝗫𝘂𝘶 project, the main objective is really to make the modernist architecture relevant to everyone. I think it's very difficult for us to understand and the architectural achievement of our modernist heritage, but it is even more important for us to make it understandable by the general public. So it's not just a professional who say that modernist architectures are sort of valuable in our urban landscape, but also our people, our citizens, our residents in the neighborhood would embrace the values, the social values of modernist architecture, and therefore the everydayness of this architecture and how they relate to us and how it relates to our roots, how they relate to our identity, as well as relating to our national building efforts in Southeast Asia. The terms modernity, and modernism are very widely used, and I think we should look at them as a way of construction of what we have been through both during and after the colonial period. And I think we should also look at it as a construct that is probably given to us from the Western-centric cultural perspective, and now we are going to make it our own. But in making modernism and modernity our own, there is a certain sense that we have to be ruptured from our tradition. And that should not be the case and need not be the case. And so if we embrace modernity by looking at new technology that's affording us, as well as vision for our future that is given to us, how do we carry this forward and look at modernity, especially the idea of good living and a new aesthetic supported by new technology to be our own. And that is something that I think we need to look at in the context of our own city, of our own development, and of our own democracy. Of course, we all know Bauhaus in the both the school as well as other buildings in promoting a sense of aesthetic that relates to using more industrial components with very streamlined lines and spatiality, as well as decorative effects with geometry. And that ideals of a new architecture devoid of decorations have been applied in the West, and most importantly in some of these modernist buildings in the Shillongs of Bruno Taut or of Otto Rudolph and other modernist masters. And in some of these ideals, we see the expression of a modern way of living, away from the crowded interior of the historic city, but having this openness and this green all around the the city. And that happened in Singapore as well. The Singapore Improvement Trust, set up in 1929, work on new buildings within a very, very crowded urban neighborhoods, such as this one in Terengganu streets, having a brand new white building amongst the shop houses with hanging clothings and washings, as well as very crowded streets. And that is the narrative at that time on health and hygiene in terms of sanitary, in terms of living condition. And this is contrasting what happened before the work and what happened after the renovation. A very clean interior, very airy, ventilated, and all in the interest of good living. And that is something that is imposed by the colonial government on our city in a sense of promoting a kind of modernity that they felt would be good for our city, following the pattern that we see in Europe, in Western Europe, and in England in particular. And so some of these estates designed by Fraser from England in the 1940s, the Tiong Bahru estates, seeing this brand new, really white, shining edifices of modernity with cross ventilations and really large balcony, providing shading to the interior. I think it's something that is really important for the residents at the time, but fitting into the narrative of modernity that we see. And he also tried to depart from the kind of planning and urban layout of, say, the German Shillong, by having open space and open developments, very well ventilated, not enclosed by buildings, but buildings enclosed by open spaces. So that's their sense of modernity expressed in housing. However, apart from housing, we also have a number of modernist buildings. Here I include buildings that are from the last stages of the new modern in a way, such as the Metropolitan Theater in Manila, designed by Juan Arellano in 1931. When I visited, this building was under renovation, so I have no chance to see the inside. I hope one day I can come back to Manila and see the inside of the building. I think it's such a gorgeous, gorgeous theater. Yes, it's a beautiful, beautiful edifice. I'm sort of bound over by this building. In my 4-day stays last time in Manila, I visited this building 5 times, right, in different times and different days and different lights, and I'm trying to see how it sort of feature in different times. And it's such a fantastic application of modernist ideas with this massive form and so on, but attenuated by curved lines, as well as very sensitive decorative elements. And as I said before, Art Deco is my really first love. And so this is a fantastic example of that genre. But that kind of architecture that's sort of providing a background to modernist movement in Southeast Asia is also seen in Singapore. This is a Majestic Hotel that was erected by 𝗕𝗏𝗀𝗃, a very rich Chinese merchants in herbal medicine, and the hotel, the theater was built for his wife, who's a very, very avid Cantonese opera follower. And so for his wife, he built a theater. And this theater, the Majestic Theater, designed by Swan and McLaren, probably Chinese and English architects working on the project in 1928, exemplified both the modernist and Art Deco elements, very similar to the Metropolitan Theater, with elements of decorations that you see embedded in the surface of the building with Chinese motifs, as well as a bit of Art Deco geometric forms. But that existed at the same time, or around the same time, as some of the buildings that we see that was built by the municipal architects, like this one, Frank Ward, the design for the new terminal for the Galang Airport, which is a new airport, 1937. And this modernist building really brings in the Bauhaus principle of streamline the lines and the space and the lights that comes into the building with industrial parts are really following what we see in Bauhaus building, except that because this building is located in the tropic, so there's some overhang, and you can see how they protect the interior apart from the tower. And it's a fantastic building designed by foreigners within the tropics, but exemplified and leading the way into a form of modernist architecture in Southeast Asia. I'm sure most of us know about this building in Phnom Penh, one of the fantastic example of Southeast Asian modernism, built at the same time as the Galang Airport Terminal in Singapore, designed by 𝗕𝗫𝗄𝗃 and Louis Chahon in 1937 in Phnom Penh. And the fantastic volumes and the four kind of aisles, together with some ventilation devices and the space that is within, with the lights streaming down, it's almost like a new cathedral for Phnom Penh, but housing the market. And so you see the inside with this four main aisles and four subsidiary ones, with this hovering central space and the dome structure. And again, that's a modernism with new technology, with a new vision of a market that would not be possible in the past. And one example from Hong Kong, slightly later in 1956, again by the municipal architects, is the City Hall that has this very clear reference to Bauhaus aesthetic with the lines and so on. And this was more or less every day. And so the modernist discourse that started in the West, having to do with health and hygiene and sanitary, as well as a better way of life and a better kind of image, has gone on for a number of years in Southeast Asia and maybe Hong Kong, before even the independence movement. But with the independent movement, we come to the second point, which is to think about the local, the tropicality and the identity of Southeast Asian architecture. Now, I say that modernism tries to make a rupture with tradition. How do we appropriate tradition in this particular new form of modernist architecture? And is the tradition a very powerful element in our identity, and therefore we need to appropriate the tradition? Or do we want to make a clear break with the past and having nothing to do with the Western modernist tradition, but maybe still using the same language, as well as embedding them with local culture? And so the other possibility or the other elements to think about is whether the skill available to build modernist architecture can be seen as well in Southeast Asia. And so my first example is 𝗪𝗪𝗪 Conference Hall in Phnom Penh, designed by the wonderful architect Van Monivan. Monivan was trained in Paris in the Beaux-Arts School back in the 40s, and returned to Phnom Penh and Cambodia in 1956. So this is one of his earlier commission to do a conference hall. And in this conference hall, because of the sort of localization of architectural imageries, he tends to use some local elements, including the pagoda tower or spire, as well as the roof form with modern concrete, and fanning it out like a Cambodian or Khmer fan. And therefore, this building in particular is known as one of the earlier example of the new Khmer architecture, new Cambodian architecture, identifying the modern form with the traditional elements, and therefore situating the building fairly and squarely in the Cambodian landscape. His other building slightly later on is primarily modernist, with the very powerful shapes and the form using concrete, as well as really fantastic use of staircases to provide this inverted pyramidal shape of the stadium. However, with some elements like the spire here of Cambodian architecture. In Singapore, Alfred Wong designed the National Theater in 1963, and this is a theater that was used for political rallies and so on from 63 when Singapore joined the Malaysian Federation, and 1965 when Singapore became independent from Malaysia. This building had been in the forefront of all the political events and nation building in Singapore or in Singapore history. The five towers prism form or diamond shape, signifying the 5 stars in our tradition, in our national flag, as well as the use of red bricks, which is seen also as a local material, and the huge overhang of the theater with natural ventilation that has been really a space supported by the new technology, the new possibilities, and showing off the identity of the country. Unfortunately, it was demolished in 1985, which is really a very sad event. And this is why the urgency of protecting our modernist heritage is so important, and this is what you guys are doing, and I'm really saluting you. The International Convention Center in Manila by 𝗏𝗏𝗏, of course, later on, Jean-Claude would talk about 𝗏𝗏 in more details. It's another form of modernism that is not necessarily rooted in the tradition. I think he himself was not interested in bringing the tradition into his architecture, the modernist architecture, but interpreting it with a slightly different spatial as well as a slightly different ambience that he really wants to express, especially in the buildings around the cultural center of the Philippines. Many buildings, including the convention center, the theater, the performing arts space, the arts museum, and so on, all exemplifying his very clear roots in modernism. Even though he was trained locally at your university, University of St. Thomas, one of your best, I think, the most illustrious alumni. He also went to the US and talked to Paul Rudolph and other people in 1959. And with that kind of encounter, he had come back to the Philippines to design in Manila architecture that is really much more international than local, but looking at some of the possibility and stretching the potential of reinforced concrete, of steel construction, to understand that bring out the local flavor, which is this floating feeling with this layer of void, with this massive monumental solids hovering above the void. And so this particular image of the entrance into the convention center exemplified the ideal of how he proposed to deal with this modernism in this very, very new building with this sort of sensibility. Now, we will come back to 𝗏𝗏 later on. But if we turn to Singapore and to look at around the same time since the independence in 1965, we look at the Golden Miles complex that I mentioned just now along Beach Road. This section of Singapore City around the beach and facing the sea was intentionally earmarked for a new city. That was in the UN plan that was started in 63, sorry. And with this plan, the buildings are supposed to form a new axis and new path in a way to answer to the need of globalization. So as far as identity is concerned in Singapore, the identity is not about the tradition, as we have four very varied traditions from the Chinese to the European to the Malay and the Indian, as well as other minorities. And therefore, the tradition to us would be something that is embedded somehow in modernist architecture in a very subtle way. And so the design was won by DP Architects with William Lim, 𝗚𝗏𝘀𝘁 and Gan Ning Mon, and the building was completed in 1933. Now, William Lim and 𝗚𝗏𝘀𝘁 set up a 𝗕𝗏, Singapore Planning and Urban Research Group, and the group has a manifesto that was published in 1966 about modernist architecture, about the coexistence of this mega structure that will sit very, very happily, as you see in this particular slide, with shop houses on the right. And that mega structure would answer to all the needs of the citizens of this new monumentality, of this new identity as a global city. And I think the idea of global cities, of super skyscrapers, as well as the identity of this new forward-looking, international-looking city, I think is something that Singapore was striving for in the early days of the independence. And this, within the context of Southeast Asia, I think is not new. Instead of looking into the traditions like the Malay tradition in Singapore, they look at the international scene, the global city of tomorrow. And this is simply because Singapore, locating in these trade routes for more than 400-500 years between China and India and further west, had been exposed to different cultures from all around the region as well as further afield. And so with that kind of cosmopolitanism, the new Singapore from independence onwards are looking towards that new direction. And so the identity became more of a identity that looks to the international scene. And so instead of tabula rasa, William Lim argues that Singapore is not homogeneous and hyper-real, but that at every phase of its development, its negotiation of the conflicting forces of colonialism, socialism, communism, and capitalism was inscribed in our built environment. And that, I think, is a fantastic summary of what had gone through in their mind in terms of identity. And so this mega structure, this really very powerful structure really tells us about this struggle, about this social rethinking, social form of retrospection, but also looking forward to form a new architectural type with this new atrium spaces and so on. And I'm very happy that it's going to be preserved, and I hope we can look at this and really find a way to bringing back the glory of that structure. In this section, I think I would like to end with the Church of San Andreas, which is a building that I fantastically loved by 𝗏𝗏𝘀𝘁, erected in 1968 in Makati. And there's San Andreas, the Church of San Andreas, the apostle, with the San Andreas cross. I live in Edinburgh for 7 years, so San Andreas to me is very, very close. And the diagonal cross is a fantastic symbol of this particular saint. And the shape of the interiors is just 𝗍𝗂𝘆𝗆. The use of concrete, sorry for the quality of the image, and the very free form and the openness. I gather that the glass had been put in later on, but the openness, the ventilation, the identity of a new Catholicism, a new symbol for the Catholic faith that will not go back to the Spanish past, that will not go back to the Italian past, but creating a new space and a new form for this enduring religion of the Philippines. The 18 lobes of these flowers overshadowing the congregation, with this openness at the bottom, and a fantastic cross, the copper crucifix by Manansala, hanging over. I mean, this is just so powerful as a symbol, and also a symbol of collaboration between the artists, again, the artist of the nation, Manansala, as well as another artist of the nation, 𝗏𝗏𝘅, as well as our other artists working on the baptistry, the baptism of Christ image, and so on. It's just so fantastic. I'm so sorry that I have to take picture quietly during a service, because otherwise I would not have been able to get into the church. And so, so unfortunately, I have to do that. But it's such a fantastic experience. I would love to come back to this particular church again and sitting in there quietly, rather than taking pictures, to enjoy the space that is afforded with this new identity of the Philippines and so on. However, around this time, even in, say, former Yugoslavia, in eastern part of Europe, or the western part of the Soviet Union, and in Ukraine, you see this sort of experimentation in terms of the use of concrete, such as this one here, the Institute of Information, from 1964 to 71. I have a chance to visit Ukraine and Kiev 2 years ago, and saw some of these buildings, and it's really quite fantastic. But in this particular examples, as well as this market in Kiev, the starting point is not really an identity of the Ukrainian, but the starting point really is a modern space with modern materials. And so the tectonic aspect of the architecture is totally different from what we see in Southeast Asia. And that brings me to the last point of my presentation, and that is to think about post-coloniality, the visionary for the new nation and the building up of the nationhood. And so it was at the moment in the 60s, the Southeast Asian countries gained independence between 1946 to around 1965, 1970. And within this 10, 15 years period, the ideas of shedding away the colonial past and moving towards a new nation is really exemplified by a new attitude towards colonialism. Of course, right now we have another attitude, but at that time, that attitude is very, very important for us to understand how we treated or how we regard colonizer, the colonial powers, and how we regard our post-colonial period, and how we transform our mindset with a new ambition. And so the Masjid Negara in KL, designed by Baharudin, is a very clear example of this breakaway, but not totally using the traditional and symbolism of the dome for the masjid or the mosque. Sorry for the quality of the image. It's all from the internet, but it's a fantastic group of buildings. With the mausoleum of on one side, the main mosque, the prayer hall on the other side, and this labyrinth of pathways and alleyways leading to different functions within the masjid, including the teaching function. Is a clear example of the kind of Corbusian grid system with spaces intermingle, but concentrating on the main space, which is the main prayer hall. And Tunku Abdul Rahman, the prime minister at the time, was commissioning Baharudin and the other two architects for designing this building. And Baharudin said, "I really don't like a dome. It has no character. It's like rolled up something and then sit it down on the table and it goes pop." Right? Then on top of it, you put a spar and then a star. Right? So that to him, according to some reports, it's not something that he's interested in. But when he presented his plan to Tunku Abdul Rahman, just like you students presenting to your teachers. 𝗏𝘂 said, "What is this? A mosque with this design? Where's the dome? Doesn't feel very nice, lah." So he's against not having the dome. But very fortunately, Baharudin standing here really convinced 𝗏𝘂 to accept his design. And his design is based on the parasol. When you see the king opening the mosque, based on the parasol, it's a kind of covering with this very powerful dome. When you see from inside and outside, the space again is a fantastic rounded space with this again the folded plate that's afforded by the concrete, the use of concrete, and allowing this this again really good ventilation, but also a kind of universality, right, when you are in here because of this round shape and the shape of the folded plates. But he also used some of the Islamic elements, like in the trellis and the opening, as well as some of the mosaic pattern. Now back to Singapore, about the same time, 1965, in the new nation, there is a need for creating a new conference hall and trade union house, and this was open for competition, and Malaysian Singaporean architects, Lim-Chong-Keat, helming the Malayan Architects Partnership, had won the project. And Lim-Chong-Keat was trained in MIT, and he was again a very global and international well-known architect. And he, in his design of this building, he allowed the building to have this interpenetration. And I mean, I love this picture because of all this wonderful vintage cars. But allowing this, I mean, the reason why I show this is that the building is now quite mutilated. So it's not like what it was before, not like this image here, where you see a very clear organization of space, the towers for the vertical circulation, the stairs and so on, the horizontality of the sun shading devices, the volumes within this particular structure, hovering over them is this massive concrete roof, and then the roof comes level by level down, forming a balcony on the left, and then the canopy for the entrance on the in the middle. And so it's a kind of it's a building that has no solid form, no geometric form that you can talk about, but organizing all these little spaces with horizontal planes moving from the outside into the inside with the very nice kind of organized structural grid, right? And so it's a very simple ideas, and this universality with this roof and the structural grids harmonizing the whole structure is something that would bring the architecture to answer to the needs of this particular new nation, with the conference hall on one side and the trade unions offices on the other side. And so he said that if nationalist tendencies are unchecked, there's a real danger in many of the developing countries that the architectural development will become stylistic expression based on myths of cultural independence, instead of taking root as a progressive discipline can offer newer and better technology and aesthetic solution. So he's not going to go into the route of the traditionalist, but building up this nation that's looking forward, using perhaps Western technology, but creating a tropicality and identity of its own. And so that's but even then, having a very small section on the bottom right with a Bangkok inspired tile pattern that say something about the local style. The last project that I want to show, of course, is 𝗏𝘂𝘁𝗵𝗲 project, and it's again another project that I really love. And again, I wish to come back again to see the inside of the auditorium, which I've not got a chance to do. The 1966 Cultural Center with this beautiful space that I can see embedded in this massive concrete structure that has this monumentality in the front, the floating ideas, as we mentioned before, and this very beautiful curvatures that brings everything up to the top. And so 𝗏𝗀 is said to have said that at the time I was designing the theater, I was obsessed with massive forms. I wanted something that was massive and yet light. It had to have a certain floating feeling. And that's all harking back to the tradition in the Philippines, Filipino houses, but having this very, very international outlook. But giving it also a sensuality by having the curves that we see everywhere, right? So I'm really lucky to be able to get inside to see that monumentality that is sort of kind of toned down by some of these lines that he's so famous for, and the staircase that moves up and down, and the kind of curves. I mean, I just cannot fail to be impressed and mesmerized by all these curvy lines of a kind of sensuality that probably was in the Philippine nationhood, but not going into the traditional romanticism, but having a new language that forms the basis of the nation building efforts in the Philippines. I want to close with this slides in Dakota Crescent public housing that was built in the 1960s in Singapore. And one thing to talk about, just the last point, we look at a lot of monumental architecture. We look at a lot of institutional architecture. I think we should also pay a lot of attention to the everyday architecture, like this housing estate. Fortunately, this building is going to be preserved, but just 6 of them out of 13. And I really would like to see how we can bring this back into our social consciousness, that around the time between the independence to, say, 1970s, the ideals, the vision, the technology, and the aspirations of the architects expressed in the architecture has a lot of relevance to today, to what we are today, who we are today. And therefore, we need to bring this social value and social significance into the contemporary society so that we can appreciate and would want to preserve and conserve some of these buildings. Thank you very much.
𝗚𝗂𝘆, thank you very much, Dr. 𝗚𝗂𝘆, for that very enlightening and enriching observations and perspectives of modern architecture in Southeast Asia. Sir Ho, we have a lot of questions already, but we would want to you have whetted our architectural appreciation and appetite. Can we start with a very easy question? May we know what you loved about the Metropolitan Theater? Because we are very excited to hear that positive reception from you, sir.
I mean, I really, please invite me to come back when the pandemic is over, because I really love that theater. As I said, I think it's not just about the form itself or just about the surface decoration, but it's a blending of the two. And I love colors, and so that colorations on the facades and the pixelation of the decoration, I think to me is really fantastic, which is something that I don't quite see in other Art Deco buildings in Europe, for example, or in Miami. And that the ideas of the form and decoration that sort of married together so well is really something that I enjoy. But I would love to enjoy the space inside, from the outside to the inside, and enjoying a performance in that particular space.